I welcome you to this session on the accident definition clause under Workmen's Compensation Insurance. In this session, we will understand what qualifies as a workplace injury, what does not, and how this impacts employers, HR professionals, and insurance practitioners. Now, before discussing what is the definition of an accident in a WC policy, let us first understand who is a workman and what is the necessity for a workman's insurance policy. So, it is important to define who a workman is. A workman is any employee engaged in an occupation where they are exposed to risk that may cause injury, death, or disease. A key requirement here is the existence of an employer-employee relationship. The Employees Compensation Act 1923 establishes, as modified from time to time, establishes the employer's legal liability for any injury, death, or occupational disease arising out of and in the course of employment. What is the necessity of an workman's insurance policy? In the event of any accident resulting in injury, death, or occupational disease, the employer is legally liable to compensate the employee. This can result in significant financial loss for the employer, and this is why insurance becomes essential. The law operates on the principle of no fault liability, meaning the employee is not required to prove the employer's negligence. What are the requirements for coverage? For a claim to be valid under this policy, three key conditions must be met. Number one is the accident must occur in the course of employment. It must happen at the workplace or during work-related duties. And there must be a clear employer-employee relationship. While this policy is not mandatory, that means every employer is not mandated by law to take this policy, it is highly recommended due to the potentially high compensation costs. We will see further why whether having an insurance policy or not, why the liability of the employer would become absolute. We will see that in later slides. Now, let us go to the scope of cover of the workman's compensation policy or the employees compensation policy. A workman's compensation policy will typically cover accidental death, permanent total disablement, permanent partial disablement, temporary disablement, legal costs and expenses, and medical expenses whenever it is taken as an extension, and occupational diseases. Now, how do you define an accident? An accident is defined as a sudden, unforeseen, and involuntary event caused by external, visible, and violent means. So, to trigger a valid claim, this event must result in physical bodily injury or death or disease that arises out of and in the course of employment. The wordings out of and in the course of employment are significant and open to interpretation in a court of law. There are many case laws which have helped to define what exactly constitutes employment, and the same have been collected in the succeeding slides. We will be going through these cases to get a better understanding later. So, in a WC policy, how do you define the accident? The core requirements for a covered accident, for a policy, for an incident to meet the policy definition, it must generally pass three main tests. One is the employment connection. The employee must be actively engaged in the employer's business, not pursuing personal errands. So the work that the employee is doing must be in connection with the employer's business or whatever it is the work for which he is being employed. The location and circumstances are important. The incident must happen at the designated workplace or while performing authorized duties. So sometimes the duties allotted to a workman may take him beyond the physical premises where he is employed. So if he is on the job allotted to him by his employer, even if it is out of the physical premises mentioned in the policy, still it would be considered to be employment in connection with his within the duties and scope of his employment. Uh, the third, the injury must arise from a risk inherent to the job or incidental to the nature of the employment. So, having defined this, we will be continuing to go to the key details and special clauses. One of the most important concepts under a workman's policy or an employer's liability policy is the concept of no fault liability. Under the Employees Compensation Act, the claims operate on a no fault basis. That means the insurer will pay out regardless of whether the employer was negligent, as long as the accident happened on the job. So the employer's negligence or lack of it is not the criteria. The criteria here is that the workman should be doing the job which was allocated to him when the accident happened. Then secondly, there is a commuting clause, and this clause has been the subject of so many cases which we'll be studying later under the case law section. So generally transit is not covered because in the policy the place of work is clearly defined. That means the location is clearly mentioned. However, recent judicial clarifications state that commuting accidents are covered if there is a strict nexus of time, place, and circumstances linking the commute to the official employment, for example, using employer-provided transport. So when the worker is traveling or commuting for the specific purpose of doing his job, then that if the link is established or the nexus is established between the job and the duties which are allotted to the workman, then even the commuting will be covered under that. Next is the question of occupational diseases. An occupational disease is technically distinct from accidents because certain types of occupations will result in specific diseases which arise out of that occupation. For example, let us take the example of a worker in a cement factory. So here the occupational disease would be the improper functioning of the lungs due to long-term inhalation of cement dust. That would count as an occupational disease. So the policy will be allowing to extend the coverage to include specific diseases which are directly contracted on the job. Then we will go to the next slide. So what are the typical exclusions? The policy does not cover employee accidents involving employees under the influence of alcohol or illegal drugs. Deliberate self-injury, suicide, or willful neglect, disobedience of explicit safety rules by the employee will also be an exclusion. And then all risks arising from war, invasion, and nuclear hazards are excluded under the scope of the policy. Now, having gone through this, we can now start going through the case laws, which will give us a clear understanding of these three conditions which we had mentioned earlier. That means the definition of a workplace, the commuting clause, as well as the relationship between employer and employee. All these are the three main clauses under a WC policy. And the case laws which we are going to go through will demonstrate how uh, uh, how the case laws will interpret each of these situations. So in India, the workmen's compensation is governed by the Employees Compensation Act 1923. Formerly, it was known as Workmen's Compensation Act. And the key statute and doctrines which define employer liability when an employee sustains personal injury or occupational disease. The Ministry of Labor and Employment provides the complete Employees Compensation Act for full statutory details. I would encourage you to download the same and go through it. Now, we will look at some of the landmark cases where the scope of the workers' protections have been progressively expanded and clarified under these case laws. So we'll take the first one as the commuting accidents, also known as the Daivshala case. In Daivshala and others versus Oriental Insurance Company, the Supreme Court of India ruled that fatal accidents occurring while commuting to or from work qualify uh, qualify for compensation under the Employees Compensation Act. The court established that if a clear nexus exists between the accident and the employment, such as traveling to a shift, it is considered in the course of employment. So that means, let us say a workman is traveling from his home to the place of work in a company provided uh, transportation, means of transportation. Then that, if an accident occurring during the course of the transportation, during the course of the travel, midway, would constitute still to be as to be on duty. So that will be covered under the policy as a for compensation. The theory of notional extension. Here is a case of the regional director ESI Corporation versus Francis de Costa. This is the concept which establishes the nexus. Here, this case proves or shows that an employment relationship and its associated risk can be notionally extended beyond the physical premises of the workplace if the employee is engaged in activities incidental to their employment. So, just to take a small example to get clarity on this, let us say that a workman has been sent by his employer to deposit money in a bank. So he is traveling on a bicycle or a motorcycle or whatever means of transport which the employer has provided or which the employee's own vehicle also is being utilized. And when he is officially doing his duty of taking the money from the workplace to the bank for deposit, he meets an accident on the way, and it is not within the physical workplace or physical premises of his actual place of employment. Still, that nexus of employment is valid because he is officially on duty on work given by his employer. So it need not be confined, the accident need not be confined to the physical workplace as defined in the policy. The connection is made if he is out of the premises in the course of his work or employment. Proof and causation. In this case, Prabhakar, Maruti, Garwali, and another, the Supreme Court outlined that there must be a causal connection between the injury, the accident, and the work done. So here, the onus is on the applicant to prove that the work and its resulting strain contributed to or aggravated the injury. The only proof that the worker is supposed to give is that the injury or accident or whatever is connected to the work done by him. That's all. He need not prove the employer's negligence. He has to prove only that the work and the resulting strain has caused the injury or given the occupational disease, whatever it is. So there are other case laws. Sometimes overlapping motor vehicle claims are there. Here the case is of Mohammed Masood versus the New India Assurance Company Limited. Here it has been clarified that the Motor Vehicles Act and the Employees Compensation Act are two separate statutes or laws. The claimants can pursue relief under either act but not both. So, for example, the driver, the conductor, or the cleaner of a vehicle who is employed by the owner of the vehicle, in the event of an accident during the course of his work, if he meets an accident, then he has to uh, claim. He can claim either under the WC Act or under the Motor Vehicle Acts, but not in both. So, insurance companies cannot use the compensation caps established in the older Compensation Act to limit payouts in motor vehicle accident claims. So, in case the workman or his heirs choose to select the Motor Vehicles Act to pursue a claim, then the mere fact that he is a workman will not influence uh, the limits of compensation, because both are different acts or both are different laws, and whichever one the employee chooses to adopt, it will be by that law only. So you cannot you cannot apply the limits applicable to the WC Act for a claim preferred under the Motor Vehicles Act. That is what it means. Specific state level laws such as Telangana Shops and Establishment Act may independently expand the applicability of the Compensation Act, Central Employees Compensation Act, to additional retail and IT establishments. So some states have expanded the scope of the act to include specific types of shops and establishments. Now, in another case law of General Manager BEST Undertaking Bombay versus Mrs. Agnes, 1964. In this case, the employee was the bus driver of the BEST company. After finishing work for the day, he left the bus in the depot and boarded another bus to go to his residence. That bus met with an accident, resulting in injuries to him and leading to his death. His widow laid a claim under the WC Act. Now, the employer, of course, denied it, saying that his duty was over when he uh, parked his vehicle in the depot after finishing his duties, going home. He was not on work-related situation. That means his work was done for the day and he was going home, so it cannot be considered to be in the course of employment. Now, the question was whether the death of the employee occurred in an accident arising and out of in the course of employment within the meaning of Section 3, bracket 1 of the WC Act. The judges answered the question in favor of the employee. Two judges answered the question in favor of the employee, while another judge ruled to the contrary. However, the majority out of a bench of three, the two have concurred or have uh, acted in the interest of the employee, have concurred that the employee, if he is required or given the facility to travel in any bus belonging to the corporation to reach the place of his duty and also while returning therefrom. So in this case, all the BEST drivers were given a facility of coming to their place of duty by the corporations buses only. So if he is coming to work, he can get into any BEST bus and come to work, and at the same time in the evening after his duties are over, he can go back to his home using this facility of the BEST bus. So since this is uh, not a matter of grace or something like a perk given to the employee, it is found that it is a matter of right given to the employee, and it was a condition of his service that the employee was obliged to travel in the buses of the corporation as part of his duty. So, under these circumstances, it was held that even though the employee was returning home in the BEST bus after his duty was over, still he was considered to be on employment related work only, as that facility had been given by his employer. And rather, he was obliged to use this facility given by his employer. So, this is a very landmark judgment. Then in the next, United India Insurance Company versus Philo, 1996, in Kerala High Court, a taxi was stolen and the taxi driver was killed. The application for compensation under the WC Act was allowed. The division bench of Kerala High Court held the murder to be an accident which arose out of the employment of the employee. The relevant portion of the said judgment says the short question arising for consideration in this appeal, filed under Section 30 of the Workmen's Compensation Act, is whether the killing of a workman while he was in the course of his employment by an unknown person can be considered as death caused as a result of an accident arising out of his employment. So the ruling was that since though the driver of the taxi was murdered, because he was on duty, because he was working for his employer at that time, it is to be considered as an accident only. So the compensation was allowed. Other case laws are there in the state of Maharashtra versus Aarti, 2008. an employee killed his superior during an altercation in the office. The application under the WC Act was allowed. The Bombay High Court dismissed the appeal. Relevant portion of the said judgment is as under. Whether murder tantamounts to an accident. So, in earlier case also we have seen that murder of the taxi driver was considered to be an accident as defined in the WC Act. Here also, the High Court, Bombay High Court has ruled that though it is not defined in the general clauses, uh, the definition has been considered taking into the account the dictionary meaning of the term accident. So it is here ruled that the employee could not have contemplate or think that he would be murdered in his own office, and his subordinate killing him was thus an untoward happening. That means it is not, as far as the deceased person was concerned, it was something which had happened simultaneously without any sort of planning, and it was considered to be an accident. In Rita Devi, the Supreme Court has compared the provision of Motor Vehicles Act and WCA Act, and learned counsel for the respondents contended before us that since the Motor Vehicle Act has not defined the word death, and the legal interpretations relied by us are in with reference to the definition of the word death in the WC Act, the same will not be applicable while interpreting the word death in the Motor Vehicles Act, because according to her, the objects of the two acts are entirely different. She also contends that on the facts of this case, no proximity could be presumed between the murder of the driver and the stealing of the auto rickshaw. We are unable to accept this contention advanced on behalf of the respondents. We do not see how the objects of the two acts, namely Motor Vehicle Act and Workmen's Compensation Act, are in any way, and the relevant object of both the acts is to provide contention to the victims of accidents. So here also in the case, the driver of an auto rickshaw uh, uh, was killed while in the act of stealing the auto rickshaw by somebody. So here the when the heirs of the auto rickshaw driver filed a case under the MV Act, then there was an objection from the other side saying that since death is not defined in the Motor Vehicles Act, then the definition of death as mentioned in the WC Act cannot be applied to the Motor Vehicle Act. The judges have very wisely ruled that whether it is under Motor Vehicle Act or the WCA Act, the aim of both the acts is to provide compensation to the victims of accident. And here the auto rickshaw driver is clearly the victim of an accident. We have seen in earlier two case laws that a murder was considered to be an accident as far as the employee is concerned. So that was the ruling. So the only difference between the two enactments is that so far Workmen's Compensation Act is concerned, it is confined to workmen as defined under the Act, while the relief provided under Chapter 10 to 12 of the Motor Vehicle Act is available to all victims of the accidents involving a motor vehicle. In this conclusion of ours, we are supported by Section 167 of the Motor Vehicle Act, as per which provision it is open to claimants either to proceed whole. The only difference between the two enactments is that so far as workmen's compensation is concerned, it is confined to the workman as defined under the Act, while the relief provided under Chapter 10 to 12 of the Motor Vehicle Act is available to all victims of accidents involving a motor vehicle. In this conclusion of ours, we are supported by Section 167 of the MV Act, as per which provision it is open to claimants either to proceed to claim compensation under the WCA Act or under the Motor Vehicle Act. A perusal of the objects of the two enactments clearly establishes that both the enactments are beneficial enactments operating in the same field. Hence, the judicially accepted interpretation of the word death in WC Act is, in our opinion, applicable to the interpretation of the word death in the Motor Vehicles Act also. So, in short, what it means that there are two ideas here. One is that for the purpose of definition of the word death, it doesn't matter if it is not defined clearly in the Motor Vehicle Act. The application can be taken from the Employees Compensation Act or the WC Act. And number two, as per Section 67 of the MV Act is concerned, the employee is free to choose under which act he wants to pursue his claim, whether it is under the MV Act or whether it is under the WC Act. So that is the crux of the matter in this slide. So this is the end of this session on the WC policy, and I hope that it has been a good learning experience for you. Thank you so much.